Right now, I'd like to talk about the process and, more importantly, the idea of how we think through the different stages of the game until we actually reach a key point. See, I believe that one of the biggest difficulties that most chess players experience is that they don't really know what things to look at first, second, third, and so on, and that's where the whole trouble really comes from. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of an insight on that and do it through a few games that I'm going to play. And I'm going to comment on my thought process through each stage. These are going to be longer games or shorter games, but you're basically going to see the difference. And the key is to give you the key secrets of becoming a more successful player. So, basically, I want to introduce the first rules that I'm going to attempt on applying right now. So we're going to start with a large concept. First thing, let's begin with the concept of activity. The most important concept that every great player basically uses in his games is the concept of being active. And that is a big thing because all you need to do is to control the center by basically taking away some of the best squares. And by doing so, the next thing that you would obviously want to do too is going to be to make sure there is more. Like there's just you get all the pieces around it and everything else. Like my idea of developing the pieces in the middle, towards the middle, and of course that bishop. So of course now there's the castling idea and things work well. It's really easy to develop very well, but you'd also want to make sure that you restrict your opponent. Like that, it means that you take away the most valuable moves like a4 and others that are rather needed and most necessary as they go. So with that in mind, I feel like I was able to do this quite well. Now I'm going to go for rook e1. I think it's a fairly decent move. Okay, let's see now what I'm going to do. I'm going to play with h3. Pawn structure is just as critical because when you get the right pawn structure, it kind of secures it, it solidifies the ways your pieces can be and the things that they can do. And that's very important, especially in the opening, because this is where you create the structure that you will use to further build on and apply most pressure about. So it's a very good thing. I'm going to try rook to d1. And you can see now, it's not just those couple pawns, it's not just the couple bishops, it's really everything that's playing a good role. So how to plan next? Okay, so we finished with the development. What is the right approach to go by next? Now, the proper approach in these positions, basically, is the idea to, I think, slowly improve. We have to find those pieces that are least useful and get them further. One piece like this could be the knight. So setting it on the h4 to exchange for black's knight will be useful. It's also going to open a flight square, an opportunity for the rook to move in and possibly transfer itself towards the g3. In the early stage of the middle game, it's always about improvement. Everything is about how you could regroup your pieces, set them up, and make them to get a little ahead, a little better developed and stronger. Now that would also mean there's a move like rook g3, challenge against g7, a possibility against h6, all those quite beautiful ideas. And it definitely looks really good in this case. Let me tell you that when you apply such an approach, the other thing that's very important is that you give your opponent the perfect possibility to make a mistake or mess it up. And often that's huge. Like now he's just created a terrible weakness immediately on the king's side. So all I have to do is to think of the possibility to keep my bishop around, hold the extra pressure, and the opportunity to advance against the e5, and most likely focus on rook f3 and other possibilities to reach out on the king's side. That's a really, really very, very valuable idea. Okay, now he plays bishop f6 to attack in the middle. It's okay. I have the development, I have the setup, everything's ready. So I feel I could just as well play rook f3 and set up a trap. Point is, if he takes the d4 pawn, I'm going to use this rook to sacrifice on f6. And then as a result of knight takes f6 and then queen takes d4, I'm going to destroy the dark squares, take out the d6, and really use all that almost perfect development to create different sets of problems against my opponent. You see, now he's thinking because he feels the danger. Okay, this move makes sense. He would like to maintain that knight as a powerful tool. The good news is that I could actually attack that knight, and that way, as soon as I attack on it, he might have a problem. You see, okay, let's see how this is going to work. But my point is that, okay, now probably his best move is going to be to play g4, and then, okay, no, he didn't do it. But he should have, because now I'm attacking both the f6 and f7. Okay, this is a smart move. Basically, considered towards the defense. Now, my bishop on h2 is definitely a little bit bad, but I don't feel like I've got to worry too much or all too much about it. So, I think now I've rushed a little bit. This is definitely a little problem when you have a good position and you suddenly rush it. But I still believe in the excellent development as they would have built. So, my point is, let's not give up. Let's continue with the strong pieces and just build upon that. There is a move g4, although that will open knight f4, so I'd prefer to just keep up with the rooks and the queen, of course. These are too good. So now, point is, he's behind, he's backward in development, and he's passive. Okay, that secures the knight, but I still have the initiative. I still keep my own pieces, or I can keep them, towards, his territory or against him. f4 is an idea, so that in case he takes, I could recapture, or I could open up my rook. Although he's going to have bishop g4 eventually, and it could get dangerous, I feel like I should try to open up and give more room towards my pieces. Given the excellent preparation that I have, this is a fair move that simply seems to guarantee me some extra pressure. Now again, his pieces are fairly undeveloped. I've got tension over there, and I've got the possibility of a threat like rook takes f6 and even queen takes h7 that are both rather nice. See, it's really all about that activity that you could keep, because when you can keep a good activity for a little bit longer, that would help you to maintain the power that you really need for all the different threats. And so suddenly I feel like a move of rook takes f6 could be a good job. So taking, point is that I've got queen takes h6 as a threat, and I'm actually going to do it. And then I've got even a move like queen h4, which will help me to collect his bishop, and we'll get the material equivalent of 2 minor pieces for a rook. You see, I didn't even need to know if all of this was correct. All I needed to know was whether actually my activity was going. And as long as I had that activity in place, it was all a killer. It was all winning. And I can just take the knight right now with my queen. And that would also help my king to go through. So I've got basically 3 pieces for a rook. Now, usually you need at least 2 pieces, but I've got 3, and that's destructive. All I have to do is to activate the bishop onto c5, and this will be more than just a pretty idea. The 2 bishops, the beautiful rook, the essential trick of attacking the black king, all of it, as you could see, plays a big role into my into a conditioning that I'm going to give. Rook's best on the 7th rank, and of course, he's going to try to get his own rook on the h8, but I'll just move my king up to f3. So the rook is going to be tied down to the defense on f7. Of course, I want to get my knight into the play. I think the best way to do this will be through d1 to e3, and then possibly to f5. That way, when the knight gets to maneuver at such a powerful position, it will apply all sorts of different threats. Of course, his intention is to exchange, but the more exchanges that basically black does make it just easier, because he cuts off his own ability to, really manage any counterplay. So his rook is terribly passive, and as long as I have the time, I think I should be able to win rather easily. So it's all a matter of creating the pass pawn right now. So likely my next move. Oh, okay. So he's basically just blundered the rook, but it was really a losing position anyway. So that's pretty clear. So one of the really important things that you've got to remember is that uh, there is very little that can go wrong if you simply try to be active, because being active in chess creates that powerful possibility of you really turning your pieces and your possibilities into something much bigger and much more important. So try to focus on that, no matter what time control you're playing, whether you're playing blitz, bullet, or other time. It's actually going to be very helpful as long as you maintain that command between your pieces, and the way they work together. If you look at the games of Magnus Carlsen, I find it incredibly amazing how beautiful how beautifully he handles the different activity of his pieces. It's just that he sets it up, and he almost does what I would often call as an active defense. And the concept behind an active defense is that you want to set it up, and then once you get that activity in place, you want to just let it grow, let it get there, and then just make it all that powerful. And it's really a big deal. Most chess players rarely get to think about it that way, but I always say it: if you get the activity right, almost anything you do is going to be easier. It's going to be simple to follow. That's why you really want that so much. That's why you need this ability to get active. So the three rules. Let's talk again about the three key principles of activity. First thing, you would always need to make sure you fight for the center. The center is the ground level. So that means you're looking for those four squares, and you want to put either the pieces in the middle or towards the middle. Okay. Second, make sure your pieces are as advanced as possible, not in a risky way advanced, obviously, but as further as they can be. That would be really a big deal, because if you could bring them on the more advanced squares, it's going to help you big time to reach out and attack more effectively. And the final point being is, yes, you do need to make sure that you have a plan. It doesn't have to be a big plan, a large plan, but you see, the plan is what I'd call the catalyst for your whole play to work. Even if it's a bad plan, it's better than no plan at all, because if it's a bad plan in the process, it can turn into a good one. But if you don't have an actual plan, then it could get bad. So it's like you really want to have always this sort of idea of, okay, what's my plan going to be, or where I could really make it work. So that's a big idea. It's really important to keep in mind overall. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look for some players. Hang on. Okay, so all right, so nobody is there to accept. So I'm gonna sign in a different place and try to see if there will be other players, so we could actually try what I would call the gambit strategy. The gambit strategy is super important in my opinion, and it's because when you think about it, it's all about, like, just how can you set a right gambit and how can you make it work effectively. So it's a big deal. Okay, so let's see. Um, it's really a tough thing, but I believe it's very important to have the right command. So give me a second. All right. Sorry. Okay, so let's see. So what I want to do, but while actually I'm doing that, while we're setting up for an opponent that we can apply that strategy, I like to show you specific ideas on how you could make a more successful setup. Now, first of all, when you're white, if you want an active strategy, which I believe is the most successful strategy in chess, always begin with either e4 or d4. If you play with e4, people can play a whole lot of things against you. So you might find that a little bit more complicated, a little bit more challenging. But that's okay, because when this happens, eventually, all you could do is just play knight f3 and rely on an easy development. Now, most chess players are really concerned about getting into an opening with a whole lot of theory. Do not be concerned about that. And the reason why I don't want you to be concerned is because, when basically black plays for the move a6 or anything, people are not aware of what the major goal of the opening is. So what is the major goal of this opening? Well, it's all about that, actually. It is just making sure that we take control and we just continue with our development. There could be the way to play with bishop to the e3. And there also is the chance to play a little further down the line with moves like, for example, bishop d3. Key goal, key beat of any opening in particular is making sure we have the space, and then we could use that space to build our plan, maybe on the king side or towards the center, wherever it is. It's a big idea. Now, of course, that's just for the opening, but remember how necessary it is to get the opening right. Because if you don't get the opening right, you're not going to be that successful at all. So essentially, you want to be able to get the opening right. So yeah, like basically after the move of short castles, eventually black castles, you can play f4. See, in my game, I was thinking about a4 too, but that's all right. It doesn't have to be necessarily played out. It's just a little thing. See, key point about any of those games, about any of those possibilities, is the idea that no matter what it is that you do, you'd always like to think, and I mean really to concentrate on gaining more space towards the middle. That is, again, this is the catalyst. We can make a move like queen to the f3 in this position, and we could make so many different tactics and ideas that could potentially work out, perfect. So that's a very huge idea. Now let's talk about this. So here is a 15-minute game that I'm starting. It's a long game, but I feel like this is pretty big. Let's discuss that game and talk about. So first of all, I'm going to go with c5. I'm going to go with something that is rather slow and consistent. Then I'm going to play with the move of pawn up to the d6. And again, my point is I want to go for a counterattack. Now, what my opponent is trying to do here is attempt to open up the center way too early, which, of course, I do not quite agree with. So, actually after the exchange, and then there is a recapture. What I'm intending to do next is to play ahead with my knight, bishop, possibly castle, bring out the other bishop, and feel perfectly safe to do so. It's going to be a really nice position. See, my opponent is taking his time to think about it, and he plays d4. That's fine. I'm not intending to leave him with an incredible amount of space here, so I'll play d5 myself. Remember, the big deal about these positions is that you just want to get enough control. Now, it's taking some time for the control to really sink in, but it's you do build it like a Lego, like one step after another, after another, after another. And then, at a certain point, you realize, okay, I've got so much in place that it is beautiful. I could have even played bishop takes f2 and queen b6 right now, but because I'm talking, I actually missed it. Of course, you want to be thinking about attacking moves too, so you don't get to miss, brilliant resources of that kind. But it's just that build up. That activity provides you with so much more. I didn't get to use the gambit approach. Probably that's going to be for another time. But the idea is, let's build up, let's focus on the activity, and let's concentrate towards the center. Moves like bishop g4 are going to be perfect. Then knight d4 is going to take on. It's the really what I'd call often the secret to fast and not only games. The secret to faster and not only games is making sure that you could create a solid position and great activity. And let the activity do the heavy lifting for you. That is my only secret, really. Now, there's other things, other strategies and techniques that can make you feel better and more powerful, but it's really that one major thing that counts as most critical about these positions. So it's a really big deal. And now we could realize that I'm intending to follow up. I could do the move of bishop to the g4. And this is a pretty good setup because it's the pin on f3 that forces white to actually lose a little bit of his momentum. And it could give me a wonderful possibility to do different things. Like I can do bishop h5 in that moment. Possibly get that bishop onto the g6. Of course, takes. You see, my dad had a saying about these positions. He used to say, let your opponent paint bullshit on the board. I really love that. And one of the reasons is because when you let your opponent to make the mistakes, he'll do a lot of them, and you can be certain of it. It's just that we as players often get impatient, and we try to do things our way quickly. Like, for example, maybe bishop g6 was like what I was attracted to do first. But then something stopped me, and then I was like, okay, if I play bishop g6, he's just going to move his queen onto a6, and complications are going to happen. Why do I need that? I'm not going to win anything from that. And I'm going to feel constantly unprepared in all of those tactics. So instead, I could just go for a move like rook to the e8, prepare my rook, line it ahead, and then maybe even go for moves like bishop g6 and others to just force my pieces on as they get better. And again, keep in mind, this is easy to do. This is the structured approach that most grandmasters pick to do. The reason why most intermediate or beginner players do not do that is because they don't think so logically about the position. They think in terms of calculation. And there's a little philosophy, I believe, why that happens. I mean, if you think about the way we think when we go to work, when we do our everyday lives and our everyday activities, we always have some sort of a plan in mind. I mean, even if it's just a very quick plan, we always do it. I mean, you're not going to go into your car and start driving, just to get somewhere, like without looking at a map or without knowing the route. It's normal. It's logical. But the reason why we do that in chess is because the mind, the way I would explain it, is that the subconsciousness perceives the game of chess as a puzzle. And being a puzzle basically suggests that there's got to be a calculation we have to follow. There's got to be something really fixed, something really concrete. And so the mind keeps on calculating and calculating and calculating without really finding any specific solution. So we get, really dragged in that river of constant calculations with, no ending. And if you really start to think about it, chess feels like a puzzle, but it really isn't. It is a very creative game. It's a strategy where it really depends on the buildup of both players who constantly try to improve their positions in hope that things are going to go well. We have to treat it similar to a fight, to a battle. It's not about tactics, yet they're immediate. It's not about concrete solution even. It's often the strategy that helps, and that can only be done through a logical approach. Like now you can see that once I got the build-up, I had no idea where it will give or it will get me. But it's my opponent who would help me often with that. As he moved the rook on the e1, I get the open line for the bishop. And so that gives me a perfect possibility to set my queen in g3, creating a threat against the f2, and lining up a move like bishop takes f3 as a result, should white choose to go back with his queen on b2. It's pretty. It's really nice. I like the way on how everything has turned out, and I was not expecting it. That's what you got to know. There's no way for you to expect how the activity is going to pay off. You just have to know that it's there, and because it's there, you will sooner or later turn this into something beautiful. Now, probably not winning, but certainly it made him to worry, and it made him to spend quite a few extra moves in defending. And so I can possibly increase in that by making a move like knight e4. You see, compare my pieces now, including this powerful queen that's challenging f2, the bishop, the knight that's there, the rook that's supporting, even the centralized two pieces, as opposed to every single one of those by white. You get to see how terrible his pieces are. And so without having to do any necessary calculation or the need to feel perfect, I just know that all of this is bound to succeed. It is the way that the game will naturally grow and become very powerful to me as this whole thing starts. A lot of times, people do not appreciate enough the opportunity that they have when it comes down to building up a position that is both necessary and strong. And so you could see now that it's all there. The bishops, the queen, the pawn, and the rook. Of course, he has that queen that you just activated, but how much can a lonely queen do? Okay, I underestimated that because now he can take me and possibly, take the bishop. You see, this is if that's why you don't usually want to talk and play at the same time. So I have to apologize about that. Right now, you see, if my queen is hanging, this is called a motive. All I had to do is just to move my rook and I'd be perfect. Or I could have just taken an f3 and then you would be checkmated. Bishop takes f3, queen takes d8, king h7, and then g2 would have been a checkmate. But when you talk and you play at the same time, that's what happens. So I just need to have an excuse for making stupid moves like that. But you see, of course, there's no way for you to avoid plundering. That's why I say don't get distracted when you play. But these are just training games, so it's always a useful thing to go over the key points, and the result really doesn't matter so much. In fact, if we go back one point, and okay, so he didn't see it. Obviously, he just got too into saving himself. But if we go back for a second, if I took on f3, it would take on e8. And I would play king h7. He would get checkmated because both of the pawns are pinned and there's no defense from queen g2. But obviously he was so into defending, and that's another problem. You see, I notice a lot of players get a tunnel vision. Tunnel vision is like when you think about something, you get so much into that you forget that other things exist on the board. And that's why I say that before you ever even get into calculation, you want to look at the board and find out what's actually out there. Because finding out these nuances, these specifics about the position, really helps a lot to to avoid getting that sort of tunnel vision. And so you could see the different possibilities, not only for you, but also for your opponent and everything. So you see, it's a very necessary thing that most chess players really don't tend to do. So remember, be open-minded. One of the easiest ways to do it is if you actually have a checklist. This doesn't always happen. Most people are not comfortable with the checklist, but I found it was very helpful to internalize certain things and certain habits, create habits. A checklist like, what does my opponent want to do? What are his actual threats? What are the things that he's gonna attempt to follow so that he could be most helpful with his tactics? It's all these little ideas that often tend to help, because when you do it one time, it's probably not going to help all too much. But when you do it again and again and again and again, it becomes something incredibly valuable. And you want to be able to do this for almost anything you do on the board. It's a big possibility. So now with my king on the h7, you see, also try something else. If you are winning, do not necessarily try to win in the conventional way, I'm going to break him down in a move or two. On the contrary, try to focus on gradually setting up and That way you will take away any counterplay that your opponent could possibly utilize. As you could see, my idea in here was all about just bringing this king forward and simply, like just pushing him down. Of course, he wants me to take and open up his pieces, but why do I have to do that? I don't need to do that. I can make my king, and as you probably heard about this, the king is the most important piece in the endgame, after the rook. I can make my king be as valuable as the rook and the two bishops. And then, if there's anything that he can do, I'm going to be totally prepared. Because I'm going to have literally every single one of my pieces up in the play. So ask yourself that question as often as you can. Can you make every single one of your pieces the most powerful forces they can be? If you can achieve that, and you can reach that level of perfection, I guarantee you there is going to be nothing that can stop you, no matter who you're playing. It's all about consistency. So that's the thing that helps me to break him down now, because it's really just those forces that are working together, and the impossibility for him to do anything. So I'm going to have to do now, most likely, I can actually move that bishop down, or I don't need to. See, I don't have to play backward move. I can just get my king a little further and move it down the road and step forward. And you see, again, remember that in end games, everything comes down to activity. If you stand more active, you stand brilliant. There's nothing the opponent can do to you. But you've got to get that level of activity. And you see, you frustrate him, because it's frustrating when you see how the opponent is just moving up his pieces and making them more powerful. It's really frustrating to experience a position of that kind. So in most times, it's quite beautiful. It's quite great. So yeah, like now I'm gonna get continue with activity. It doesn't matter. Like whatever he's trying, I'm gonna still stand up towards the idea of being more active. It's a great deal. Now I'm gonna play with f5, and then I'm gonna continue with f4 check, and likely a little bit of a checkmate is gonna pop up shortly in the next moves. So of course his intention is to promote, but it's a very lame attempt. King h2, rook h1, king h4, g5. Activity is the first rule of any endgame really turning successful. So don't forget that. Hope this makes sense. And this is just a little bit of an idea or a concept that you might want to remember and keep in mind whenever you're playing a game.